Have you ever tried pine cone jam?
Have you ever tried teriyaki crystals and change?
Episode 5 of Dungeon Meshi has a few rough spots toward the start, but really catches its footing in the second half. And we get to learn more about the world outside the dungeon, Fallon's place in the dynamic of the party, and the little guy secretly living in Laios' sword. So let's break it down and compare it a little to the manga along the way. You know the drill. This episode was both storyboarded and directed by Aika Ikeda, and covers chapters 10 and 11. We're introduced to this new party for the first time, and it's a fitting introduction to open the scene with such attention to this shot of Kabru taking a bite of some normal-ass fish. We spend a full 7 seconds watching him cut this piece and put it into his mouth, and the way the camera follows the fork to his mouth, it's as if this is an action shot in the middle of a battle. This emphasis on the regular food outside the dungeon immediately draws a sharp distinction between him and Laios, and sets up Kabru's position in the story as a foil to Laios. I also love this shot where Kabru emerges from the darkness to scare his party members with this lie about cannibalistic adventurers. The whole shot is desaturated except for his piercing blue eyes, which makes him look super unsettling. And the blurred edges of the shadows and bloom effects added in compositing to the highlights make this look ethereal and otherworldly. This is just one drawing separated into 2 layers, so the hands can move closer to the camera faster than the head, and that combined with this weird wobbly effect makes economical use of this one single drawing. This also might be a more extreme version of the same wobble effect that I pointed out in episode 2 with the mandrake omelets, and which will also pop up again later in this episode. This shot where Kensuke wraps his weird little parasite tentacles around Laios' fingers feels really smooth and fluid, and the tentacles are animated on 1s until they come in contact with his hand when they start to be animated on 2s. And it's cool how his fingers instinctively react when he feels the tips of both the tentacles come up from underneath his first 2 fingers. This bit of character acting when he struggles to pull his hand free consists of 7 frames repeated. At first he cycles through all of them in order, with each drawing on screen for 3 frames of video. But as the cycle speeds up and he gets more panicked, not only do the frames cycle through faster and faster, they also start to throw in repetitions where the cycle will go forward 2 frames, then back 1 frame, then forward again, making it look like he's struggling erratically with increased intensity. I also love the way Senshi is just standing stock still in the background like a goddamn Matryoshka doll, and the simple choice to put his feet closer together makes his head look extra empty. This cut is cool, and I like the smear in his eyeball, but Laios gets a little cubist as he draws the sword. The angle of his nose makes sense when he's close to us, but as he gets farther away, it should be more centered. So by this frame, it kinda looks like his face is smushed against glass or something, and his nose is being pressed sideways against his face. It's not a huge deal because it's in the middle of an action, but this certainly isn't an intentionally weird in-between or anything like that. The sound design when the treasure bug unfurls its wings is really cool, mixing the organic chittering sound with what sounds like the metallic clink of a coin touching another coin. This is another economical use of a single frame, but this one feels a little weird with the artificial feeling movement of the camera, and maybe it would have worked better if they had just stuck to the standard anime move and split this into 2 shots, one of Laios and Chilchuk and one of Senshi, and done the slow tilt upward with some camera shake and speed lines laid over the top. In fact, this whole sequence is kinda unfortunately simple. I would have hoped for maybe a shot where the bugs swarm around in front of the camera. It wouldn't have had to be super complicated. You could just animate a bunch of simple little gold shapes zipping around with the characters in the background and give a better sense of danger. I mean, what is Chilchuk even afraid of here? This one bug nonchalantly flying behind him? The visuals just do not match the level of drama that the music seems to think there is in this scene. This shot of this nasty little guy's legs squirming is really cool though. And some more YouTube editing. We finally reached the point in the evolution of the planet where young anime creators are now being influenced by YouTube videos. What a brave new world. This blown out, scribbly shot, which is much like the impact frames from previous episodes, except it's an entire cut, so it's not an impact frame, conveys that these 3 got caught in the blast of Marcel's stun spell much better than the manga. God, I adore the way Laios reacts to Senshi's little medieval PowerPoint presentation about the bugs, and particularly in the dub, I think it's neat how he says he thinks it's neat.
I think it's neat.
It looks like the majority of the attention for this section went into the cooking montage, and the little wobbly heat distortion effect and the glow coming off the coins adds a lot to this shot. It's also a cool detail to show how the bubbling oil intensifies as he presses down on one of the coins. Though, a tiny note, the frying sound could have gotten a bit louder and higher pitched here to accentuate it better.
It's ready.
I don't think this glamour shot is done by the food illustration specialist Mmmmmmm this time, which I guess makes sense because it's not really what you would traditionally think of as food. This keyframe was done by Chigusa Kiyota, though I'm not sure who ended up coloring it all in. The numerous layers of highlights and shadows and bloom effects still give it that glossy look though. This is such a great final tableau for this section with 3 different things going on, Laios in his own world over here, and I especially like that they chose to include Kabru's dead party just chilling in the corner, which wasn't there in the original panel. Ghosts begin to appear, and this is one of the first hints that the dungeon might actually get legitimately frightening. Chilchuk gets all dog-pilled, and I don't think he can really get mad at people for thinking he's a kid when he's doing whimsical-ass stuff like this. We're treated to yet another goofy Laios running shot, and this inverted bit is a cool way to show the haunting. I also like the numerous layers here, how you can see the outer skin, but also the skull underneath, and finally Laios' hand. And the way the ghost passes through his hand is really cool. This was probably done in compositing with a simple mask that animates between the 2 copies of the hand, one on top, one underneath, but it gives a great sense of volume to the ghost, especially with the shape of that nose. Much of this is probably thanks to the monster animation director, Yuto Kaneko, who also did some key animation for the opening. All these layers are here in the original art too, but they're a little easier to understand when they're put in motion. This cut, by someone who just goes by Haruki, is another opportunity for a little tidbit about animation behind the scenes. This keyframe is the final position of Marcel touching her forehead after getting blessed by Fallon, but the key animator also determines the timing of the in-betweens, so this is a timing chart over here. Each of these lines marks a frame, and you can see that these little marks indicate that the distance between frames A, B, C, and D are all equal. Then there's one extra frame in between frames C and D, and because each frame is shown for 1/8 of a second, that makes her hand slow down as it reaches her head. In the final product, it looks like the distance between C and D is actually a bit shorter than the first 2, making her hand slow down a little earlier, but the chart gives a general guideline. This little hand motion that Fallon gives to tell Laios to bend down so she can reach his head is insanely cute and shows the bond that they have as siblings. And boy does it bug me that in the dub they pronounce it as Fallon.
You could do that easy, Fallon.
When she disperses the spirit from this possessed corpse, this effects animation is much like a standard explosion tinted blue, except that the timing is all wrong for something like that. The way it bursts outward then freezes midair for a second before quickly dispersing gives it this otherworldly feeling. Senshi's explanation of the ingredients to the holy water, along with the earlier mention that the treasure insects are a delicacy in some regions, both point to a wider world out there with diverse cultures outside the scope of the current adventure. And the harp music as Senshi gracefully prances around dispatching the ghosts is a great choice. It's another great addition to have Marcel swing her legs in glee from the sorbet, and Laios is off in his own world playing with Kensuke again. Another good episode that makes good use of what seems like somewhat modest resources. I'll see you next time when we get to learn a bit more about the history of the dungeon and the kingdom that it once was. Ooh, spooky. Oh, and subscribe button, like button, you know.